Night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other pay-per-review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 6 p.m. This is Dewbs & Co with me tonight, Emily Carver. Coming up, as it's revealed the Nottingham triple killer could be eligible for release in just 3 years should the Attorney General refer the case to the Court of Appeal. Families of his victims say he got away with murder after being sentenced to a hospital order. Meanwhile, a prisoner in Alabama has become the first inmate in the world to be executed with nitrogen gas. The witness accounts require strong stomachs. Is the death penalty inhumane? You tell me. Also tonight, the 2024 tax list is out, but are the super rich paying enough? Can you guess how much tax the #1 person paid last year? I'll tell you shortly. And to the opposite end of the scale, and new figures today show the rate of shoplifting in England and Wales has hit its highest level for more than 2 decades. Is there ever any excuse to shoplift? Plus, is marriage on the way out? The proportion of married people in England and Wales has fallen below 50% for the first time. Should our politicians do more to uphold the nuclear family? Or is it none of their business, frankly? And finally, Claudia Schiffer has caused quite the stir this week after parading her cat in a rucksack down the red carpet. Experts say the cat would have been stressed. Should pets ever be used as fashion accessories? Right, well, a lot to get through in the next hour, but first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Emily, thank you very much, and good evening from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 6 o'clock. The headlines. There may be more tax cuts to come in a second tax-cutting budget before a general election in the autumn. It follows this month's reduction in national insurance contributions, with the government claiming it will save people around £450 a year. The Tory chairman, Richard Holden, told GB News earlier that workers will feel the benefits.
We're coming out of that very tough period, and we're able to outline our plans for the future. I think the actual tax cut you mentioned, the national insurance cut for working people, is the start of that. We'll see more of that in March and more of it later in the year as well. But we have that new direction of travel, which is clear.
But Shadow Secretary for Women and Equalities, Annalise Dodds, says people are still worse off.
What we've seen under the Conservatives has not been tax cuts. We've actually seen tax rises, 25 Conservative tax rises just since the last general election. And the reality of the national insurance so-called tax cut, it was actually just giving people back £2 of every extra £10 that they're going to be paying in tax. So I'm afraid this is a bit of a tax con.
To sport, Jurgen Klopp has promised he will never manage another English club after announcing he's stepping down as Liverpool's manager at the end of this season. Liverpool was transformed under his leadership, winning 6 trophies, including the Premier League in 2020. That was their first in 30 years, and the Champions League a year before. Speaking to reporters this afternoon, he said there'll be plenty of time for a transition.
With all the responsibility you have in this job and these kind of things, you have to be absolute top of your own game. That's how it is, and I am. But I'm doing this for 24 years now. I realized that my resources are not endless.
In other news, the UN's top court has ordered Israel to take measures to prevent genocide and to punish those who may incite it. A large majority of the 17 judges in The Hague voted for urgent action to improve humanitarian situations in the region, but fell short of ordering a ceasefire in Gaza. Instead, the court ordered Israel to refrain from any acts that could fall under the Genocide Convention. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, says Israel, though, won't be deterred from defending itself.
The charge of genocide leveled against Israel is not only false, it's outrageous, and decent people everywhere should reject it. On the eve of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, I again pledge as Israel's Prime Minister, never again. Israel will continue to defend itself against Hamas, a genocidal terror organization. On October 7th, Hamas perpetrated the most horrific atrocities against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and it vows to repeat these atrocities again and again and again.
Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary says that progress is being made to release hostages that are still being held by the Hamas terror group. Speaking in Turkey after a Middle East tour, Lord Cameron said a sustainable ceasefire is possible. He's also working to get more aid into Gaza, with Israel said to be considering a British proposal to open its Ashdod port, one of 3 main cargo points. Back here in the UK, the Attorney-General will consider a review of Valdo Calcane's sentence after receiving a complaint that it could be too lenient. The Nottingham killer was given a hospital order yesterday and will likely spend the rest of his life in a high-security clinic. He was found to be suffering from a severe mental illness when he killed 3 people with a knife before attempting to kill 3 others. He'd stopped taking his prescribed medication and said that he could hear voices in his head. 3 psychiatrists agreed that the hospital order would be the best course of action. Baroness Michelle Mone and her husband have had their assets frozen following an application by the Crown Prosecution Service. The Financial Times is reporting it amounts to around £75 million of assets. It comes as the couple are being investigated for their involvement in supplying PPE during the pandemic. Michelle Mone has previously admitted that she did lie when denying connections she had with MedPro, which made profits of £60 million. And finally, the Queen has told people inside the London clinic that the King is doing well after undergoing treatment for an enlarged prostate. Buckingham Palace says His Majesty is delighted to learn that his diagnosis is having a positive impact on public health awareness. And before his hospital operation today, the King is understood to have visited the Princess of Wales, who's also recovering from surgery. That's the latest from the GB Newsroom for now. For more, we're on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. Just say, play GB News. Now, though, let's get more from Emily.
Well, welcome to Dewbs & Co. with me, Emily Carver, tonight. Now, with me this evening, on this Friday evening, I have the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie. Thank you for joining us. And the trade unionist and broadcaster, Paul Embry. Thanks to you too. I haven't seen you for a while.
No, it's
nice
been a while.
To see you.
Yeah, you too.
I used to sometimes do this slot for Dewbs, but it's been a few months, I think. So it's nice to be back at this time of the evening. Now, you can get in touch with everything we're talking about this show. So gbviews at gbnews.com. As always, please do send in your messages. Or, of course, we're on Twitter, if you prefer, at GB News. We do monitor those as well. Now, let's start with probably the biggest story of the week, the biggest tragedy, and also possibly the biggest injustice of the week. The Nottingham triple killer, Valdo Calcane's sentence could be referred to the Court of Appeal. That's after the Attorney-General received a complaint arguing that the sentence just too lenient. We've also learnt that Calcane may be eligible for release in just 3 years, could be eligible for release. Now, yesterday, Calcane was sentenced, of course, to a hospital order. That was for fatally stabbing 3 people, Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Ian Coates. Now, the victims' families have been very vocal in criticising this sentence. Mr Webber's mother, Emma, accused the police of having blood on their hands, while Mr Coates' son, James, he says the killer got away with murder. So should there be an appeal? Kelvin, what do you make of this? Of course, diminished responsibility was the reason why he was given manslaughter and therefore a hospital order. Is that justice? And do you think this should go to the Court of Appeal?
To be honest with you, I think it's a very difficult legal area. The truth about the matter is that the CPS followed the guidelines, and the guidelines were quite clear that in the event, and there were 3 psychiatrists who said this, that he was suffering from severe psychosis, and therefore he couldn't be charged with murder. However, as the mother points out, in every other respect outside the psychosis, this was a planned killing. He went and bought he bought the weapons to do the killing. He lay in waiting, right? This was all pre-planned. The issue, there is one other issue that emerges in all this, which is quite serious, that if in the event, under the treatment of the hospital order, this killer can actually end up, if he turns out to be, quotes, cured, unquotes, of his psychosis, he could, in fact, bizarrely, not have to serve his sentence in a jail. And the other issue that emerges with this particular guy is that his psychosis is triggered off when he doesn't take the drugs. So supposing he decides to take the drugs now because he's a cunning killer, supposing he decides to take the drugs in the hospital, gets, quotes, cured, can he then walk after 3 years? And this is a mistake, almost certainly a mistake by the judge in one of the orders. So I think you're going to find that when the Attorney General revisits this and sends this back to the Court of Appeal, that I think that particular alleyway will be blocked.
Well, Paul, that's not actually that far-fetched, is it? He could take his medicine, he could appear to be well enough to be back in the community, and then could pose a threat in the future. It could happen.
It's a horrendous crime, Emily, but I do think we need to be careful about assuming that we know better than the medical professionals. I mean, I have to say, I largely agree with Kelvin. You had, in fact, it was 4 psychiatrists. They went to the unusual step of getting a 4th psychiatrist, medical expert, and they all agreed with each other. And they all said, actually, this guy is a paranoid schizophrenic. He was suffering from a mental health episode, psychosis, when he carried out these wicked acts. And consequently, you know, we cannot treat it as a straightforward murder, a callous, cold-blooded murder, in the way that we would other callous, cold-blooded murders. And that's very, very difficult for the parents to swallow, the family to swallow, completely understandably. I think if it was a member of my family who was a victim, you would want to rail against that. You would want to protest. You would want to say, look, this is unfair, it's unjust, this man must be sent to prison for the rest of his life. But actually, you do have to defer to the medical experts on stuff like this. And I cannot believe that 4 qualified psychiatrists would have come to exactly the same conclusion in terms of that particular killer's health, mental health, and unless there was really something in it.
Yeah, I completely take your point, but they're experts in their field. They're not thinking about justice. And it is the victims' families who will, in many ways, serve a life sentence. We've heard multiple times from the brother of Grace O'Malley Kumar, and distraught is an understatement. Yeah,
it's true, and so it's difficult for, you know, people in a television studio trying to encapsulate the emotion of somebody being simply coming home in the early hours to their university settings and losing their life, and the family then getting a phone call which says, well, instead of getting a 2-1, I'm afraid your child is now dead. And but the most worrying aspect of all this is, OK, so it's the CPS who made up the mind on this. So this was East Midland CPS. On a crime of this size, and I'm not trying to be rural about it or suburban about it, is it entirely the decision of the East Midland CPS to decide what should happen when the crime is as large as this? Shouldn't this go up to the equivalent? After all, Starmer was the DPP. Should it go up to somebody like at the top of the tree rather than somebody at the bottom? Look, or midway. Look, I do understand there are rules about this stuff, and I think they followed the rules. That isn't going to make the parents any happier.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's law versus justice in some cases, or appears to be in this kind of case. Dave, he's saying every law seems to favour the criminal. Are we thinking too much about the criminal and the fact he had this mental disorder, and whether the victims' families feel a sense of justice? Is that more important, even in theory? I know, obviously, we operate under a legal system.
But we're not thinking just about the criminal if it's backed up by medical evidence. If the medical evidence is such that they were right, the psychiatrists, and I think we accept that they are, then it's not a question of not getting justice. You can't send someone to a prison and you can't convict them of murder if you've got overwhelming medical evidence saying that at the time they committed the acts, they were not in control of
so
themselves.
Do you think the
and therefore it wasn't...
OK, right, so here's one other point. If somebody who is suffering from that kind of psychosis deliberately chooses not to take the drug, this is a decision. And the reason they don't take it is because it changes them, and they don't like being changed. Yeah. This happens in a lot of areas. My question is, are you then guilty, right, of a different crime than if you were taking the drugs and then you carried out the crime?
I think if you knew that you were likely to commit a heinous act as a result of not taking the drugs,
which he would have known,
then I think there is some argument to say such was the personal negligence that actually you should be culpable, whether it's murder or something else. But I guess, and I don't know, but I guess that the guy didn't realise that in not taking the drug, he was likely to commit these sort of...
Well, actually, when you look into his background...
I don't know if you would ever be able to...
Right, well, when you look into his background, he had a shocking background. I mean, on the estate he lived in, every so often, for some reason not clear to anybody, he would go and smash down their door. Can you imagine what that was like?
It's also emerged that he assaulted 2 people only weeks before he went on to kill these 3 people.
And
he wasn't arrested.
And he was a regular user of cannabis, and we can't ignore that in this discussion. And in fact, Jacob Rees-Mogg, I think, raised it on his show last night, where he said, actually, you know, such was the person's use of cannabis, and we know that there is these days, we know there's evidence showing a correlation between excessive cannabis use and mental health disorders.
Yes,
and I do think that question needs to be examined. I think we need to look at that.
The liberalisation, it's becoming more fashionable to talk about liberalisation, decriminalisation of drugs. Perhaps these sorts of issues haven't been taken.
Well, I tell you what, even round my way, in Weybridge in Surrey, honestly, I walked through an absolute fog of the stuff the other night. It was unbelievable.
Horrible,
and the girl, or actually was a girl, because I think she was about 18, right, who was using it, right, was simply smoking outside the station. And there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people walking by. Nobody gave a stuff. It was incredible.
There was a car parked outside where I live all night one evening, and they were all there with those balloons, whatever they are.
It's been decriminalised, hasn't it?
Yeah, it essentially has.
Essentially, it's been decriminalised.
In a lot of the country.
And the biggest myth, which you hear in political argument very often in this country, is that the war on drugs has failed. Actually, when you look at cannabis, in reality, there hasn't been a war on drugs for many years. People are essentially free to take it, and they know they're free to take it.
Right, well, shall we move to Alabama? Because a man there, Kenneth Smith, has become the first inmate in the world to be executed, but with nitrogen gas. The witness accounts, they really do require a strong stomach. Is this totally inhumane? Is the death penalty inhumane? Or in some circumstances, can it be justified? Paul, I'll start with you on this one.
I think in some circumstances it can. You might be surprised to hear somebody like me on the left saying that, but I think of someone like Ian Huntley, and I find it very difficult to accept that someone like Ian Huntley, who killed those 2 girls in Soham, should be allowed to live the rest of his natural life and die a natural death.
What about this method? I mean, the description.
No, I think this is appalling, actually. I think from the reports that we've seen that this guy allegedly was thrashing on the gurney and writhing for up to 20 minutes, some of the reports say. And this is the first time I think nitrogen has been used in this way. I mean, it reminded me, I don't want to be too graphic, but it reminded me of reading the reports of the Holocaust, when people were gassed in the gas chambers in the Holocaust. This guy sitting there in a face mask with the gas being pumped in, I thought was actually horrific. And when you look at the way that he struggled, you can believe in the death penalty, but believe also that people should not suffer unduly.
Kelvin,
it wasn't as
so there needs to be a moratorium on this method, I should say that.
OK, well, they tried to kill him before with an injection, and that didn't work. So that was what was that? That was about 2 years ago.
That's not his fault.
Back in the day, if it didn't work the first time, they didn't try again.
Yes, I know. Well, that was quite wrong. And so I was delighted that it's not as inhumane as his actions, in which, as a hired killer, he stabbed to death the lady and the family that were all there, they couldn't give a damn. They were pleased to see him go, and I was pleased to see him go, to be honest. I don't even know him.
No, OK, fair enough, Kelvin. That's one argument to say we're pleased to see him go because he was a wicked killer, and I'll go along with that.
Okay.
He was a wicked killer, no question about that. But the point of this story is, did he deserve, does anyone, even if they've been sentenced to death, deserve that kind of suffering on their deathbed where they're thrashing around and writhing and they're in pain for 20 minutes? Do you accept that that shouldn't happen?
No, not particularly, actually, funnily enough. I mean,
Not bothered.
I honestly, he has sacrificed any humanity on my part, and there isn't much, as you would agree, Paul, on this. Right, I don't have much humanity generally, and I have no humanity about that.
Actually, then, so barbarism, then, we should, you know, we can tear people... If we restore the death penalty, then we can do what we like. We should throw people to a pack of dogs.
Well, what would you prefer? Hanging? Would you prefer hanging?
Well,
does it really matter how they die?
I think
does
hanging,
it, honestly?
I think hanging is done instantly and is far more humane than having someone on a gurney for 20 minutes thrashing around in
OK, well, I'll buy that, Paul. I'm happy. I don't care. As long as they die, I don't really care how they die.
I wasn't expecting this debate to come down to the method of which is used, but you know what? They do polling every now and again on capital punishment, and I think it comes down to about half-half.
It does.
In this country, it usually
but
does.
If you look at the political establishment and Parliament, that's not reflected at all in the national debate. There's never really a national debate.
See, I don't like it at all because I don't like the idea of eye for an eye and revenge and just the prospect of maybe getting it wrong.
But you wouldn't, if you didn't believe in revenge or punishment, you wouldn't put people in prison for life, then, would you? Because that's...
Well, I'd go easy on, let's just say, the victim's family if they decided to...
What would you... What let them decide?
Well, obviously not. No, we can't live in a society where people just take revenge.
Well, the family of the victim in this case were absolutely delighted, and they were sitting there watching it, and they couldn't give a damn about the guy twitching away. And to be fair, neither could I.
He was convicted so long ago. It seems bizarre to now.
Well, that's America. For some reason, it gets strung out.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know.
Well, on the Huntley case,
this is an academic debate, isn't it? Because the truth is, there's absolutely zero chance of it coming back. I mean, you know, you don't have enough parliamentarians who are willing to reflect the public mood on it. They would be worried about what people would say internationally about you know, Britain's reputation in the world and so on. So there's absolutely no chance of it coming back.
Well, David's written in, Paul, and he says, if we want a humane method to terminate a criminal's life, why don't we use the method that Switzerland uses for euthanasia? So people are getting in touch with their, you know, preferences.
They've got solutions.
So there you go. Well, please do keep your views coming in. I will get to more of them, of course, but coming up as we pore over the pockets of Britain's top taxpayers, do we demonise the rich? Or should they pay more? Plus, at the opposite end of the scale, is it ever OK to shoplift? This is Dewbs & Co. with me, Emily Carver.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel. Come and join me this Thursday in Scunthorpe live by scanning the QR code or going on gbnews.com to get your ticket for the event. We'll be discussing things like why the Green Agenda is risking jobs in places like Scunthorpe.
Well, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Emily Carver, and still keeping me company until 7 o'clock is the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the trade unionist and broadcaster, Paul Embry. Now, I must read this out from Key to provide some balance to that conversation, although I think I did a little bit. He says, Emily, I agree with you. Capital punishment is categorically not the way to go. Do you really trust the British justice system to get it right? 9 times out of 10, they'd get the wrong man. Well, I'm not sure about 9 times out of 10, but I take your point that you can get it wrong, and then it's just absolutely barbaric. I genuinely do not like the idea of an eye for an eye. It's a bit Old Testament, isn't it? But hey, let's move on. The former Formula One chief who admitted fraud, Bernie Ecclestone, is one of the 2 billionaires topping this year's Times tax list. He's contributed, get this, an eye-watering £650 million to the Exchequer just over the past 12 months. Is quite extraordinary, but there is a but. While the majority of us are paying more tax than we can remember, more than 2/3 of the super-rich who were on that list last year are now paying less, so much so, in fact, that the total's down by £200 million. So that's equal to the government's extra funding for the NHS this winter. Should the rich be taxed more, or do we actually demonise them a bit and they deserve a bit of a thank you? I mean, none of us are ever going to be on this tax list. I mean, imagine £650 million in 1 year.
Kelvin is.
Oh, yeah, Kelvin, yeah.
650 quid, yeah.
Well, to be fair, Bernie Ecclestone is a particular case. 650, he had a big tax bill that he hadn't paid, and it was to do with offshore accounts and all of that sort of stuff. Anyway, a big tax bill, £650 million. So, Kelvin, do you think we've got a bit of a dodgy relationship with the rich in this country?
Well, the reason that Ecclestone paid that 650 million is if he didn't, he was off to jail.
Yeah.
So he had a choice, which will be the same choice that goes to Joe Lewis, the former owner, now his family owner of Tottenham Hotspur. Exactly the same. He will pay an enormous amount of money. But dealing with the substantial point. The truth about the matter is that 50% of this country, or just under 50%, don't pay any tax at all. They don't pay income tax. They're quick to point out they pay VAT, by the way. So the burden of taxation falls on a smaller group.
It's true, yeah.
And it's something like the top pay something like 33%. Those people who pay over 45% tax pay something like 33% of all tax. They are paying more than their fair share. They are subsidising the lives of people who can't actually live the life, who cannot live the life
well, hang on.
without
So
them.
we've got Alex Gurko here, because I know what you're going to say, Paul, and I will let you say it, obviously. But Alex Gurko, a Moscow-born maths whiz turned trader, renounced his Russian citizenship, founder of XTX Markets. £664 million he's paid.
Yeah, how much is he worth, Emily?
Well, billions, clearly.
Well, exactly. So you have to put it in perspective. The five richest families in Britain have more wealth than the poorest 20% of the population. I checked the figures this evening. The richest 10% of households in Britain have half of the nation's wealth. Now, what we're seeing in this country is the concentration, more and more, of wealth in the hands of a small minority. We're seeing an increase in the gap between rich and poor. We're a rich country. We sometimes forget that. We're a rich country, but too much wealth is concentrated in too few hands. That is not good for social stability, for a country that wants to be at ease with itself. And neither, by the way, is it good for economic performance, because all of the studies show that actually the bigger divergence there is in wealth between rich and poor, the more faltering an economy can be as a result. So actually, I think there are some people who are doing very nicely still in this cost of living crisis. Some of our corporations are registering record profits. The banks are making mega billions as a result of all of the interest rate rises.
The total is down by 200 million this year in terms of this tax-paying
the point I'm making, Emily, is
because they're not making as big a profits as they were.
The point I'm making is that there are some people who are still doing very, very well. As I say, the banks, some of our corporations posting record profits. You've got city bonuses going up. You've got directors' pay going up. And at the same time, people at the other end of the scale are constantly told, you have to tighten your belts. And we're seeing the increase in that gap. And there will come a point, I think, where people say, look, we're just not prepared to accept this anymore. Most people, I think, are in favour of people getting on and earning profits, but you have to pay your share, and there are too many people...
But you see, where I disagree with you, Paul, is I think they are paying their share. The problem is that what we want, and Labour want, by the way, uniquely, I'll be amazed if any of this happens, right? What they want, we want the pie to get bigger, and I want everybody to be wealthy, if that is possible. That is not possible in the same way as I don't look like Brad Pitt, right? Let's be honest. Come on. Well, in the old days, slightly Bradish, but not really, and therefore life is not fair. But what you're trying to do is taking the bumps. You're trying to take the bumps out of life.
No, what you're doing, Kelvin, is you're saying, oh, this is what we need to do. We need to allow the rich to get richer and make more profit, because what will happen is the wealth will then trickle down to the... And there's one problem with it. It's complete nonsense. No. Actually, wherever it's been tried, whether it was here in the 1980s under Margaret Thatcher, whether it was in the US with Ronald Reagan and other parts of the world, trickle down does not work.
Untrue. Average earnings in the United States are $66,000 a year. Over here, it's just over 30,000. I want that average earnings to be 66. The way not to get them is to keep on saying, honestly, what we're going to do is we're going to take all that money from the 50% who pay the tax and give it all to the 50% who don't pay tax.
Okay, so if you're in favour of the poor earning more and increasing their own wealth...
I am, yeah. As long as there's productivity associated with it.
When was the last time you supported a strike by workers to increase their wealth?
I have never supported a strike. Never.
Well, there you go.
And even among Sun journalists, by the way, when I was a journalist myself, I was the one standout
of workers fighting.
I am not in favour of doctors leaving people to die, literally in hospitals.
Well, let's be honest, Paul. The strikes don't always come with the promise of higher productivity or a wish for higher productivity.
Well, I mean,
there often is a desire to cling on to... antiquated work practices.
Unions will always have those discussions, but people are entitled to get a decent pay increase just on its own terms because of the cost of living crisis and the rate of inflation. They're entitled to ask for that.
Look, getting in touch from home, Richard, he says the rich should be celebrated as they are in America. There is a reason why they have the most dynamic, disruptive, and biggest companies on earth. Wealth is something to aspire to, not be depressed and salty about. He says tax the rich less.
Well, yeah, it's funny you should say that because allegedly the Shadow Chancellor, right, Miss Reeves, she has hinted, I cannot believe this, that they were thinking of reducing taxes for the super rich. Now, Paul, Where will you vote if that becomes the Labour manifesto?
I will vote Labour, but I will, inside the movement, Kelvin, I will be making my feelings known about that. That would be an extremely regressive thing, I think, for any Labour government.
You disagree with so many of the priorities of the Labour Party. I'm amazed you still
they need to start listening to me, Emily.
Yeah, they're correct.
Maybe they will. Now, should we just get on to another topic, which is, in a way, linked at the other end of the income scale? New figures show the rate of shoplifting in England and Wales has hit its highest level for more than 2 decades. 400,000 shoplifting offences in just 12 months. That is quite incredible. Is there ever any excuse to shoplift if you have absolutely no money? You have children in need of food. Would there be? Would you say, all right, you know?
Right, I think that
loaf of bread.
Right, so I had a colleague who confessed to me that actually, when he goes to his local supermarket, through a sleight of hand, he takes the prices off one item, which we'll say was £3.20, 27p, and sticks it onto something that was worth.
Circles you mixing, Calvin.
Giving people ideas, Calvin.
Well, I don't think the GB News viewers. Well, now that's very interesting. People have very strong views about justice and crime and all the rest of it. Do people now view shoplifting as a political crime if you're poor? Or are they actually doing it because they think they can get away with it? And I think if you had a supermarket executive on there, they're saying that everybody is now becoming a criminal who comes in now because of those bars, and that's why they now have cameras on them there, not to listen to Paul's views on
quick
politics.
word from you on this: shoplifting ever justified?
I think in extremis, where someone genuinely is suffering poverty or they can't afford to feed their children, there, but for the grace of God, go we. So in those circumstances, actually, I think morally it is justified. I suspect there are probably not huge numbers of people in the country who would find themselves fitting into that category. And I do think to a certain degree, we're getting to a point where shoplifting has almost become decriminalised now, where people are just... I was in WH Smith's at Liverpool Street Station some time ago, and I saw this guy next to me who was just sweeping all of the, the chocolate and everything into a bag, and I thought he was someone who worked there, and then I saw him disappear out of the door, and then you realise, actually, he was just brazenly nicking the stuff.
Another poll says, does your panel consider it to be a victimless crime? A shop owner may work very hard to serve the community, only to have their livelihood stolen. Shoplifting is theft, never OK. Why do we trivialise it by calling it something cuddly?
But it's because the police effectively said, didn't they, that any crime, if it's under 200 quid, we aren't going to turn out. But remember, it was the police who wouldn't even turn out for burglaries. Now they're forced to turn out for burglaries. I think we should either hire more police or get better chief constables and start attacking these people who are literally causing prices to go up. After all, I read today that the turnover in a supermarket company is 6%, is now going on.
I'm going to have to silence you just for now, because we're going to have to get to a break, because coming up is marriage on the way out. This is Dewbs & Co. on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
This is Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver, and keeping me company still is the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the trade unionist and broadcaster, Paul Embry. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch about tax. Do the rich pay enough tax? Should we tax them more? Christine says, of course we should tax the rich more. About time the loopholes were plugged to make them pay their fair share. I guess the question is, how much is your fair share? How much is the fair share? As Kelvin did point out, the top 10% do pay an awful lot of the income tax that a lot of people rely on. Ted says, some tax from the rich is better than nothing. If you overtax the rich, they'll move to another country with less tax. Yes, I wonder what it would take for the likes of J.K. Rowling or Ed Sheeran to base themselves elsewhere.
Isn't that holding the country to ransom? Isn't that when people criticise trade unions for going on strike because their members want more money? Why is it acceptable for a very rich person to say, unless you keep tax rates low and do what I want, I will go off?
I'm not saying it's...
But they do it anyway, don't they?
But they're holding the country to ransom.
You take that guy who now owns 25% of Manchester United. Where is he making all his decisions from? He's making decisions from Monaco.
Do you think they should be able to hold the country to ransom in that way?
I don't think they're holding the country to ransom. I mean, after all, the guy who invents all those vacuums and everything like that employs 3,000 people down in the Cotswolds.
But you do think a trade union is standing on a picket line asking for a 10%
I think when a doctor is prepared to let my mum die.
What about a railway worker or a cleaner or someone who works in
take the railway
library?
workers. If they're prepared to say, well, actually, do you know what? This is a complete joke. What we do, actually, we don't need 8% of them, 9%. They can have as much money as they like. But if they carry on just saying we want to keep our terms and conditions and we want a 10% pay rise, I'm not in favour of it.
Well, Tim asks a simple question. He says for the panel: how can the UK be rich if the national debt is more than GDP? That is a good question. Are we still?
No, we're not rich.
Or are we living beyond our means?
No, we are living beyond our means and have done for donkey's years. And actually, all these chickens are coming home to roost. And it's not going to get any better under Labour. So the only thing I admire about Starmer, at least he's now beginning to say we aren't going to spend any money at all. And that is going to be a very, very good day for us all.
And what will that mean for public services? What will it mean for investment? What will it mean for competitiveness?
Well, you're going to have a word with Mr Starmer about that. I'm not here to defend it.
All of the things that flow from a government pump priming the economy and spending money and investing. What you want is roll back the frontiers of the state, don't spend anything.
I would much prefer. As would
apart from
doctors,
the rich, who will get richer.
I'd much prefer, as would doctors, not to have to work for a monopoly and be represented by a trade union. Let's have two different kinds of system so that one you pay for and one you don't pay for.
We're going to move on. Could there be trouble in paradise? There may be on this panel. But I'm talking about marriage. The proportion of people aged 16 or older in England and Wales who are married or in a civil partnership has fallen below 50% for the first time. Is the institution of marriage in trouble? Should politicians be talking about the importance of marriage and such things, or is that a bit antiquated? Should they stick out of our personal business as much as possible? Paul?
I think they should be talking about family breakdown more, even if it's not necessarily in the context of marriage. I think so many of our problems as a country are attributable to the fact that there has been massive family breakdown over recent generations, and the impact that that has on children. All of the studies show that kids generally do better if they're brought up in a stable family with two parents. They do better in terms of educational outcomes, they do better in terms of their own health, their own emotional health, they do better in terms of career opportunities and the ability to earn money and buy their own home in later life. This is cast iron evidence that politicians time and again completely ignore because they're worried, in their own words, of stigmatising single parent families. And actually, you know, there are many, many good single parents out there. We should say that. But the idea that we should shy away from saying the obvious, you know, backed up by all the evidence that kids are better off in two-parent families, and therefore we should encourage that model as much as we possibly can. It seems mad that politicians are so scared of saying that.
Yeah,
frankly.
I'm always struck by how few Conservative politicians dare to talk about things like marriage. Like Miriam Cates, for example, is a Conservative MP who does dare to talk about this, and she gets, well, she gets a lot of abuse for it. People say, "Oh, what are you saying about single parents?" Or "What are you saying about children from homes that don't have two married parents?" She's not criticising or saying that those people are bad people or that single parents can't do a fantastic job. She's just saying that on a lot of metrics, you know, having two married parents is a good thing.
Well, I'm kind of an expert on all this because I've been married twice, and I am in a partnership. There's no dramatic
same-sex civil partnership.
Not at the moment, but I'm thinking of trying that. You know.
Well, never too old to try things.
Well, exactly. Never say never, right?
Anyway, enough of that.
So
inappropriate.
I think that it works better. It's undeniably worked better for the children. There is no doubt at all about that. Now, but they're not the only people to worry about. The people to worry about are the people involved in the marriage or the partnership. And if they're not getting on, I don't know what effect that has on the children, but it isn't much of a good effect actually on the mum and dad, is it?
No.
So should you be forced by the state to stay together, or should you accept, as we do today, that there are lots of different models?
Different models.
And what's happening is the explosion in the building industry is, of course, for single homes.
Sorry, on that note, coming up, the cat controversy. Claudia Schiffer carried her pet in a backpack to a film premiere. Animal charities say it's concerning. They could be stressed. What do you think? Let me know. We'll be back in a whisker. This is Dewbs & Co on GB News, and we'll get to some of your views on everything else.
Back in a whisper.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Oh, welcome back, and I'm told this is the part of the show where we open Dewbs' tavern. So I've got a little glass of Prosecco, which is rather nice, and they've got their beers, so they're happy. My panel are happy, Kelvin McKenzie, and of course Paul Embry. Sorry, that was rather rude. On the marriage stuff, Andy's written in, he says, as a 55-year-old lifelong singleton, I've always followed the Marx mantra, marriage is an institution, but who wants to live in an institution? So there you go. It's an institution that he doesn't want to live in. Other people have got in touch to say how wonderful being married is and how good it is for children and all of this. Ian says marriage creates a solid promise between a man and a woman. Sadly, it's not promoted. And John says, my ex and I had 25 years of happiness. Then we met and the sentence doesn't finish. So I don't know what happened. And Garant says marriage is set in the woman's favour. To break the contract, men would have to be fools to marry. Well, happy Friday to you. I'm engaged, so if it's in women's favour, then you know it's all to play for. So, shall we move on to a bit of a lighter one to finish the show? It is a Friday after all. Claudia Schiffer was spotted on a red carpet this week with a rather controversial accessory. She was carrying her pet cat Chip in a rucksack with a window. There she is, looking rather glamorous. The cat not so much. This has caused quite a bit of a stir. Vets and experts have all piped up, and they've warned that Chip the cat was most likely quite stressed by the situation. So should you ever use animals as a fashion accessory like this one? Now, I don't know if she was paid to sort of show off this backpack, probably.
Her husband has just made that film Argylle, and so this was designed to gain publicity, and it's worked. It was on the front page of the Times, and now it's on GB News. So everything's good. My only question about the vets is how do they know whether a cat is feeling stressed or not? I mean, honestly, and they would. Have you seen the bills that the vets charge for this kind of stuff? I mean, look, I have my doubts. There may be vets among GB News viewers watching this right now who'll be able to tell us whether actually
he does look pretty stressed there, I've got to say, doesn't he?
He looks grumpy more than stressed.
Yeah, but I think you would be, wouldn't you, if you were stuck in someone's backpack?
Look, if I was stuck in Claudia Schiffer's backpack, I would be very relaxed.
But you might not be able to breathe, Kelvin. And think how many people that would upset.
Yeah, well, no, yes, exactly. and how many people would that? Please, that number would be a lot lighter.
No one would want to see you denied oxygen, Kelvin.
I mean, Paul, do you have a strong opinion on whether you should use animals as a fashion accessory? We're not talking about fur. No animals are being hurt, necessarily. I don't believe this cat has been hurt in any way. But is it a bit tasteless?
I don't know why anyone would want it. I mean, that to me was just stupid rather than cruel. But I am an animal lover. I've got a dog, and I do think, actually, that we should treat animals, I was going to say humanely, which is obviously the wrong word, but we should treat animals with a bit of dignity and with a bit of compassion. And where people are cruel, as they sometimes are to animals, then actually I do believe in you know, the law taking a really tough line on people.
Some people prefer animals to humans, don't they?
Well, I've had dogs probably most of my life now, and they're pretty good fun. But on the fashion accessory aspect, I'm old enough to remember when it was considered a sign of how well you've done in life is if your partner would wear a mink coat. Do you remember that? And silver fox and all stuff. If you did that today, you'd probably be assaulted in the street.
Yeah,
so
I think it's right. You don't do those things because you know, anything that involves animal suffering or killing animals for entertainment or for fashion, which is why I think one of the best things that the Blair's new Labour government did was banning hunting with dogs, which was absolutely the right thing to do. And although certain Tories would like, and certain members of the landed gentry, and no doubt you as well, Ken.
No, actually, I don't. I was raised in Camberwell in South London.
It's not something you ever did.
The foxes, by the way, by the look around my way as well, are actually running the joint now. I wouldn't...
Well, Jill says cats or dogs should never be treated like this. They are family members, albeit with 4 legs, and should be afforded the same respect, care and affection. Not as this narcissistic woman has treated the poor animal. Disgraceful. It is not a trend or fashion accessory. Strong stuff from Jill, whereas Mike says the cat should be OK. Claudia should be used to doing the catwalk. And Paul says the catwalk cat will have had the time of its life in that backpack. So there you go. Bright lights for the cat chip. Well, that's all we've got time for. Thank you to my panel, Kelvin, and of course Paul Embry. Up next, it is none other than Lee Anderson. Please do have a lovely weekend, and I'll see you back on Monday.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. There will be a lot of dry weather this weekend. Some rain in the far northwest at first, before it turns wetter across Scotland and Northern Ireland by Sunday afternoon, and increasingly windy. But essentially, high pressure sits to the south, low pressure way to the north over Iceland, in between quite a tight pressure gradient, and as a result we're going to see a blustery end to Friday across the north and northwest of the UK, particularly northwest Scotland, where there'll continue to be showers or longer spells of rain. 1 or 2 spots of rain for Northern Ireland, Northern England, but with the cloud and the breeze here it will be frost free. Meanwhile, in the south and southeast, well, it will be a chilly start to the day. A few mist patches here and there, nothing too extensive. Otherwise, plenty of sunshine and temperatures rising through the morning as a result. A perfectly fine day on Saturday for many parts of the UK. Increasingly breezy to the north and the west, and some very wet and windy weather